It started with a woman named Rosa Parks in Montgomery. And Montgomery, like all of the South, had segregated buses. In interstate buses like this one, and in city buses, the whites sat in the front, the blacks in back. If more whites got on, the blacks had to give them the middle and back seats too. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger.
The front seats were occupied, and there's one man, a white man, standing. And at this point, the driver asked us to stand up and let him have those seats. And when none of us moved at his first words, he said, "Y'all make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats." And when the policeman approached me, one of them spoke and asked me if the driver had asked me to stand. I said, yes. He said, "Why don't you stand up?" I said, "I don't think I should have to stand up." And I asked him, I said, "Why do you push us around?" He said, "I do not know, but the law is a law and you're under arrest."
Mrs. Parks was formerly my secretary in the NAACP in the local branch for about 12 years. She also worked with me when I was state president of the NAACP. And she also assisted me in the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And if there ever was a woman who was dedicated to the cause, Rosa Parks was that woman.
This was not the first time a black person had defied the bus segregation in Montgomery. It was not Mrs. Parks' first time. It was her first arrest. E.D. Nixon went to the police station to bail her out. E.D. Nixon and other black leaders called for a one-day bus boycott. In some cities, it would have been impossible to organize 40,000 people in 2 days. But Black Montgomery had a core of activists in the Women's Political Council, and they distributed these boycott notices all over the city.
But the bus passed right down in front of my house, you know, and I got up to see it, and several buses passed. I was late for work because I was trying to see how many buses was empty, and they were totally empty.
The one-day boycott was a success. That night, a mobilized black community turned out for a meeting at the Holt Street Baptist Church and voted unanimously to continue the boycott. The keynote speaker at Holt Street Church was a new preacher in town, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He was only 26 and was almost unknown outside his own congregation. King wasn't sure he should accept when his fellow ministers and other leaders asked him to head the new Montgomery Improvement Association and the boycott. But they wanted him in part because he was new in Montgomery.
Martin said, well, you know, I'm not sure I'm the best person for this position since I'm new in the community. And but if no one else is going to serve, you know, someone has to do it, and I'd be glad to try to do it. And of course, I guess everybody then assured him they wanted him. So he came home very excited about the fact that he had to give the keynote speech that night at mass meeting. He only had 20 minutes to prepare his speech.
We, the disinherited of this land, we who have been oppressed so long, are tired of going through the long night of captivity. And now we are reaching out for the daybreak of freedom and justice and equality. The only weapon that we have in our hands this evening is the weapon of protest. That's all. And certainly this is the glory of America with all of its faults. And we are not wrong. We are not wrong in what we are doing. If we are wrong, the Supreme Court of this nation is wrong. If we are wrong, the Constitution of the United States is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong.
Before the boycott, 2/3 of the bus riders were black. After December 5th, there were almost no blacks at the segregated bus stops or on the buses. They walked, and they created a complex system that used private cars to carry thousands of people each day.
We asked for persons who had cars and would voluntarily put them in the transportation pool to let us know and what time they could be used. And in that way, we could know when we would have cars and where they had to go to pick up people. People would call in and say, I'm out here on Cloverdale Road in such and such a block, and I'll be ready at such and such a time. But this was being done all through the day, and we would know what time they were supposed to be picked up and where they were.
It was really surprising because we thought, well, maybe some of the people would continue to ride the bus. But after all, they had been mistreated in so many different ways until I guess they were tired, and they just decided that they just wouldn't ride.
The black community was inspired by its own success. They held meetings with the mayor and the bus company and found they could stand up to the city commissioners. The boycott's second Christmas was approaching. Downtown stores were hurt, but neither the city nor the marchers would compromise. On November 13th, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court broke the deadlock, ruling unanimously that Montgomery's bus segregation was unconstitutional. That day, the Ku Klux Klan rode and walked the black neighborhoods again. This time, the blacks just watched, unmoved and unafraid.
The decision rendered by the Supreme Court yesterday was a victory. But it wasn't a victory for colored folks. Don't make that victory that small. It wasn't a victory for 50,000 Negroes of Montgomery. It wasn't merely a victory for 16 million Negroes of America. That was a victory for justice and goodwill. Now, what will be our mode of action in the light of this decision? After thinking through this question very seriously, the Executive Board of the Montgomery Improvement Association recommends that the 11-month-old protest against the city buses will be called off, and that the Negro citizens of Montgomery, Alabama will return to the buses on a non-segregated basis. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, let it be known by standing on your feet. It seems that it is carried unanimously. You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor. So often we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. You are reminding not only Memphis, but you are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights. And I come here tonight and plead with you. Believe in yourself and believe that you're somebody. And as I said to a group last night, nobody else can do this for us. No document can do this for us. No Lincolnian Emancipation Proclamation can do this for us. No Kennysonian or Johnsonian Civil Rights Bill can do this for us. If the Negro is to be free, he must move down into the inner resources of his own soul and sign with a pen and ink of self-assertive manhood his own Emancipation Proclamation. Don't let anybody take your manhood. Be proud of our heritage. As somebody said earlier tonight, we don't have anything to be ashamed of. Somebody told a lie one day. They couched it in language. They made everything black, ugly, and evil. Look in your dictionary and see the synonyms of the word black. There's always something degrading and low and sinister. Look at the word white. It's always something pure, high, and clean. But I want to get the language right tonight. I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.
We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were not brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so beautifully about today. Because we weren't brought here to be made citizens today, now that we've become awakened to some degree and we begin to ask for those things which they say are supposedly for Americans, they look upon us with hostility and unfriendliness. If you're interested in freedom, you need some judo, you need some karate, you need all the things that will help you fight for freedom. Nationalism is the wave of the present and the future. It is nationalism that's bringing freedom to oppressed people all over the world. It was nationalism that brought freedom to the Algerians. It was nationalism that brought freedom to the Nigerians and to the Ghanaians It was nationalism that brought freedom to the people of Uganda and Tanganyika and Sudan and Somaliland. The Africans didn't get it by sitting in. They didn't get it by waiting in. They didn't get it by singing "We Shall Overcome." They got it through nationalism. And you and I will get it through nationalism. What is it? What is it that makes it difficult for the philosophy of nationalism to spread among the so-called Negroes? Number one, they think they have a stake in America. They think they have an investment in this country, which we do. We invested 310 years of slave labor, 310 years, every day of which your and my mother and father worked for nothing. Not 8 hours a day. There was no union in that day. They worked from sun up until sundown, from can't see in the morning until can't see at night. They never had a day off. And on Sunday, they were allowed to sit down and sing about when they died, they wouldn't be slaves no more. When they died, they wouldn't be slaves no more. They'd go up in the sky, and every day would be Sunday. That's a shame. And it is that 310 years of slave labor that went in, that was my and your contribution into this particular economy and political system. They can give us the back pay. Let's join in. If this is what the Negro wants, let's join in. Let's show him how to struggle. Let's show him how to fight. Let's show him how to bring about a real revolution. Let's make him stop jiving. You don't need a debate. You don't need a filibuster. You need some action.
Now, activists in the U.S. have started a 7-day march to denounce a grand jury decision not to indict the white officer who shot dead a black teenager back in August. The 190-kilometer rally has been organized by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Dubbed as Journey for Justice, it's being staged from the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson to the capital city of Missouri State. The marchers want the chief of Ferguson Police removed. They also urged the government to end racial profiling in the United States. Earlier, protesters in several cities disrupted one of the busiest shopping days of the year, called Black Friday. To discuss the situation further, let's go to St. Louis and talk to Amali Yeshitela, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. Welcome to the program, sir. Mr. Yeshitela, with weeks of protests and demonstrations across the United States, is the United States on the verge of a black uprising?
I think that is one of the fears that the leadership of this government is concerned with, that what is happening coming out of Ferguson. Ferguson is functioning as a kind of incubator for resistance, black resistance in this country, and the fear of a genuine generalized insurgency is something that I think concerns the government. So there's a great possibility that that will occur. Some people anticipate that occurring. I think the United States government anticipates what is developed in Ferguson to resulting in a general insurgency by the black population or the African population in this country.
And what would the consequences of that be?
Well, I think that increasingly what we find is that more and more people defining the relationship that the African population in this country have with the United States government as a colonialism, a kind of domestic colonialism, that the police in this country function as an occupying force, no different from how the U.S. occupies Iraq or how Israel occupies Palestine, for example. It's a colonial force, and I think that what it will look like, increasingly, people are determined to be free and legitimately free. Even as you mentioned earlier on, the march that's going to the Capitol, while there's some discussion by people of training the police to function differently, the basic concern that's coming from many of us is black community control of the police department, that we have to have control of the forces in our communities that are carrying guns, that are sanctioned by law to carry guns, should be controlled by the people in our communities. I think in insurgency, we have seen evidence of insurgency in this country in the 1960s. It was brutally crushed. There were assassinations of leaders like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, members of the Black Panther Party, organizations crushed. That has happened, and I do think a resurgence is occurring in this country, and this time it has more of a, it seems to be developing more of an international flavor, thanks in no little part to the fact that people around the world are sending statements of solidarity with the struggle of African people in this country, stemming from the situation in Ferguson.
And of course, as the protests and demonstrations gain momentum, how violent is the police and security forces getting, and the National Guard for that matter?
Well, it is really interesting because what Ferguson has done, the sustained nature of the resistance in Ferguson has pushed to the surface the violence that African people in this country are confronted with every day by the police. So while there may appear to be an intensification of that violence, it's primarily because of what is happening in Ferguson. The sustained level of resistance has forced the government to reveal itself to public view to people all around the world, with the military forces, the tanks and other equipment that's used by the United States government to fight counterinsurgency wars around the world that publicly are being displayed in the United States. And for many people, that is something that is unusual. But for most of us in the African community throughout this country, we've been seeing this over and over and over again. So there is this discussion, for example, in this country about what they call the militarization of the police department. What they have finally disclosed is that a part of the Pentagon budget includes resources that go to supplying police departments throughout this country with military weaponry to be able to contain the African and other communities in this country, especially Mexican, Latino, etc. So I don't know if there's an intensification. I do know that much of the world is now being able to see what we experience on a daily basis in this country.
Indeed. And finally, recently we had this report that Darren Wilson, the police officer who killed Michael Brown, has resigned. Would this make any difference?
We don't think it makes any difference. He can call it a resignment, but Darren Wilson received at least $500,000 from white people in this country who paid him for the assassination of 18-year-old Mike Brown on August 9th of this year. So he can talk about resignation, but he is resigning. They call it a golden parachute in this country when corporate heads leave their companies and they are rewarded with a tremendous amount of money. That is the situation with Darren Wilson. He has been rewarded handsomely for the murder of Mike Brown. He has been rewarded by the grand jury determination. He has been rewarded by at least $500,000 that has been given to him by various people inside this country.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Many thanks to Amali Yeshitela, Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party from St. Louis. Thanks for your thoughts there, sir.
And the other thing that's really important for us to understand is this, is that African people in this country is oppressed. Let me see the hands of anybody who don't believe that. Anybody? Be bold. And the reason I mention this is so important, Because for there to be an oppressed people, right, there has to be oppressor. You can't oppress yourself, right? You can't be self-oppressed. Some force has to be involved in oppressing you, right? So we are an oppressed population. Somebody is oppressing us. That's why we have 22 times on average the wealth that white people have in this country. That's why we have a lifespan on average 7 years less than white people. That's why they're gunning us down in the streets. And according to the FBI, with a flimsy reporting process, the situation where at least 2 black people are being killed by a white cop, not just a cop, by a white cop every week in this country. And that's off less than 5% reporting coming from the FBI. They couldn't come to that conclusion just off that amount of reporting. So we're looking at a particular relationship. And you cannot separate the fact that of the police killings, the police terror in our communities from the education. Okay, next week let's have a demonstration around bad education. Then after that, let's have a demonstration around bad housing. Then after that, let's have a demonstration because we ain't got no jobs. Then after that, let's have a demonstration about all the horrible things that happen to us. It's not, you can take them and separate and isolate them out. You cannot do that kind of analysis because you come up with silly responses. So the point is that we have a particular relationship to this government. And it started a long time ago. As quiet as it's kept, African people in this country are the only people who did not come here looking for a better way of life, but lost a better way of life as a consequence of how being born here. That is the truth. I don't care how much you want to be an American, we are the only group of people other than the indigenous people who are in concentration camps that they call Indian reservations. We are the only people who didn't come here looking for a better way of life. We lost a better way of life as a consequence of having been brought here. But it ain't because white people don't like us. And some people talk about what they call racism, which is again, white people don't like us. It is not about white people not liking us. Do you think that white people were sitting up in Portugal 600 years ago and say, I think I don't want to like black people, so let's rush over there and start kidnapping them and taking them all around the world? Why did it happen? It was economics that did it. And a starving, impoverished white population, white world enriched itself through capturing black people, enslaving us, and taking lands of people all around the world. And all the places where they took land and took resources around the world, these are the people who are starving and impoverished today that they have to use drones and other kind of forms of warfare to keep them subdued. And they have to use police in this community to do the same thing. Because ain't nobody going willingly live in a situation where they can't say that their children are going to have a future. Nobody's going to say, okay, white folks don't give us no jobs, right? White folks don't give us no decent housing. White folks don't give us no education, right? And won't let us do it for ourselves. Therefore, we just accept it. Nobody's going to do that. In order to maintain that, they have to use force. Violence is the means by which they do that. And this organized force, this organized form of violence is called the state. And I want to suggest to you that this grand jury should go and deliberate, but you should not be intimidated by any assumption that this grand jury is impotent. You cannot go and deliberate with the assumption that, as opposed to applying the law to the facts, let's come up with something that somebody is going to appreciate and be more likely to say it was all right for us to do this. We cannot see our responsibility here with this grand jury as coming up with a solution that pleases someone. Our responsibility is to do what we saw a grand jury under the authority of St. Louis County and Robert McCullough. Under their authority, they refused to apply the law to the facts. To the facts. And what we are saying is that we are here today in part as a criticism of that process. Therefore, we cannot do less than that. We cannot do less than applying the law to the facts. The facts, we believe, we've shown here, not only through direct evidence coming from forensics pathologists, not only from testimony that we saw with video from Doran Johnson and other witnesses who saw what happened. Not only that, but what we did was show that there is a tendency, a trend, a tradition here in this county for doing what happened to Mike Brown. That Darren Wilson was not acting as an outlaw. He was not acting as a rogue cop. He was doing what police do to black people in this county. We show that evidence right here. We've had people who sat at that witness stand, at this witness stand, and say they shot my son 21 times, and they still haven't told me anything that allows me to understand why they did it. We've had witnesses who've talked about other relatives being killed and brutalized in this county. So we're not talking about some aberration. We are saying that Darren Wilson did it. We're saying that not only did he do it, but a cover-up was enacted. First, by the grand jury process itself, by the fact that it even went to a grand jury, as opposed to Robert McCullough using the power to take it to a preliminary hearing. So that there could have been a debate, an examination of the evidence, cross-examination, the rest of it. He didn't do that. He took it instead to a grand jury, which is a prosecutor's tool. It is a tool of the prosecution that has led to statements by noted attorneys that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. So if a prosecutor wants an indictment, he will get an indictment. We're also reminded that a grand jury is not a trial. It is not there for the purpose of examining all the evidence. It is for the purpose of establishing probable cause for an indictment. We didn't throw 5,000 pages of anything at you. I think that a real clear case was presented to you over the last day and a half that would justify your coming back after deliberation with the declaration that Darren Wilson is guilty of first-degree murder. Nobody does this to a community that they assume can deliver a consequence. It's based on the assumption that they can do it, and there's nothing that you can do about it. This grand jury says that is a lie, that there is something that we can do about it. You have to, in my estimation, come back with a determination that Darren Wilson is guilty, or should be rather, indicted for first-degree murder. And we look at ourselves, we don't have the guns. And from their perspective, when I say their, I'm talking about St. Louis County. I'm talking about the state. And I don't just mean the state of Missouri. I mean the state, the entire apparatus of coercion that is in control of the ruling class. They have all of those tools and weapons. So why should you do it? Why should you then say he should be indicted? Because we have shown you, on the one hand, the same basic evidence that was used by Robert McCullough to those 12 people in November. The same evidence, and they've come to a conclusion that exonerated, rewarded Darren Darren Wilson for the murder of an 18-year-old black child. They've done that. You have an opportunity to do something different. If, in fact, they have the power to carry out their will. When I say they in this instance, I'm talking about St. Louis County. I'm talking about the whole state. I'm talking about those forces with the monopoly on violence. They have a monopoly on violence. That's what the state is. If they have the power to carry out their will, and they can make determinations that are designed to keep you oppressed, can anybody doubt the determination that came from St. Louis County Grand Jury was designed to keep us oppressed, to keep the Michael Browns of our community dying without any kind of recourse? If they have the ability to do that, and we say that we have to move to correct that, and we use a grand jury to do this, this is a step in the process of capturing power in our own hands to carry out the mission. You can't carry out the mission if you don't start. You can't move to do anything to Darren Wilson and the rest of them if you don't start. You've got to start somewhere, and you've got to say, we're taking control of this in our own hands as an oppressed community, that we do find that Darren Wilson should be indicted for first-degree murder of Michael Brown on August 9th. That is the beginning. That is the recommendation that's coming from these prosecutors. Thank you very much.